The message came in just as I poured the first cup of coffee into my favorite cracked ceramic mug, the one with the faded Georgia State alumni logo I'd kept through 4 moves. My phone lit up across the counter. Account delinquent, foreclosure warning. Contact your loan officer immediately. My hand froze mid-air, coffee spilling over the edge and pooling on the cheap laminate countertop. I stared at the screen, numb. That couldn't be right. That mortgage account was supposed to be current. It had to be current. I'd been sending money, my money, every single month. I put the cup down slowly, grabbed the phone with trembling fingers, and read the notification again. Same message. Same horrifying tone of finality. Foreclosure? I had stopped breathing. For a full 30 seconds, my body just shut down. And then, as if someone turned up the volume in my brain, the noise started. A wave of memories, just roaring in. My name is Rachel Carter. I'm 28, a financial analyst in Atlanta, and the only daughter in a family where love was measured by what you could pay for. For 10 years, I was the one who bailed us out. Rent, groceries, Dad's prescriptions, Brandon's online art courses, though he dropped out of every single one. I carried it all. And for what? I left my parents' house exactly 6 months and 3 days ago. I remember the moment so clearly I could still smell the rain on the sidewalk. I walked out without a fight. No screaming match, no sobbing breakdown. Just packed a single duffel, shut the front door behind me, and slipped away like I was leaving someone else's life. No one stopped me. No one asked where I was going. No one called. At first, I tried to justify it. Maybe they thought I needed space. Maybe they'd reach out eventually. They didn't. Not until now. Now that the mortgage I once paid for was about to collapse. Now they suddenly remembered me. Now they needed their financial lifeline back. The kicker? The house isn't even in my name. I set the phone down and wiped the coffee off the counter with the edge of my sweatshirt. My knees were still weak. I walked to the couch, that small secondhand IKEA love seat I'd hauled up 3 flights of stairs into my East Atlanta apartment. I dropped into it, legs folded underneath me, arms crossed tight. My chest burned with something I couldn't name. It wasn't just betrayal. It was disbelief, layered with rage, topped off with that old, familiar ache of being used. Because deep down, I knew. They didn't call to apologize. They called because the money had stopped. 6 months. That's how long I'd been gone. Quiet, invisible, living on my own for the first time without dragging a family of 4 on my back. I wasn't living large. This apartment barely had enough room to stretch, but it was mine. The peace, the silence, the control over my own bank account, it was all mine. And now they were clawing at it again. I stood up and walked to the window, staring down at the street below. A delivery guy wrestled with a stack of pizza boxes across the sidewalk. A woman in scrubs climbed out of her beat-up Civic, clearly exhausted after a night shift. People living their own lives. Free. Unbothered. Why couldn't I have that? Why did I always have to be the one to fix everything? I remembered the time Brandon wrecked Dad's car. He didn't have a license. Still doesn't. But that didn't stop him from joyriding it across town. I was 17 at the time. Mom was hysterical. Dad screamed so loud the neighbors called the cops. But then, the next day, it all changed. He's just trying to find his path, Mom said. He's still figuring it out, Dad added. And me? I stayed silent. I took my babysitting money and helped pay for the tow truck. No one even said thank you. That was the beginning, the start of a pattern I never saw coming. Or maybe I did, and I just didn't want to admit it. Brandon was the dreamer, the wild card, the one everyone made excuses for. I was the calculator, the responsible one, the good girl. Which meant they expected me to fix everything. Even now, even after I left, they still expected it. I turned from the window, heart pounding so hard I could hear it. I reached for my phone again and opened my texts. 5 unread messages from Mom, 3 from Dad, 1 from Brandon, of all people. I tapped on the last one. "You really gonna let the house go under? Thought you were better than that." No hello, no concern, just entitlement. I laughed, out loud. The sound startled me. It was dry, sharp, bitter, almost manic. Because for years, I was better than that. I held it all together. Skipped dinners, canceled vacations, turned down promotions if they meant moving too far from home. I bent my back until it cracked, just so they could keep standing. And the one time I stop, I'm the villain? I dropped the phone face down on the couch cushion and leaned back. My breath shook as I exhaled. But under the chaos, under the hurt, I felt something else. Clarity. This wasn't a family reaching out in love. This was a lifeline snapping. And for once, I wasn't the one drowning. They were. And I wasn't going to save them this time. Not with money, not with apologies, not with silence. Not anymore. This time, they're going to feel what it's like when the person you depended on decides to disappear. It didn't happen all at once. There wasn't a single moment when I decided I was done. It started with little things, things I thought were just part of being a daughter in a struggling family. The kind of things you convince yourself are temporary because you believe love means stepping up. Until one day, you wake up and realize you've been standing alone on a collapsing bridge. I remember the first time I questioned everything. It was a Tuesday. I had just gotten off an 11-hour shift at the firm, running numbers for a real estate investment firm that treated burnout like a badge of honor. I was exhausted, starving, still in heels that had dug blisters into the backs of my ankles. I opened my banking app out of habit, and the number stared back at me like a slap across the face. $48.27. That was all I had until next payday. I blinked, confused. I made good money. Not billionaire good, but enough to live without counting every penny. But that month, I'd paid Brandon's dental bill, sent Mom an extra $200 for groceries, and covered Dad's overdue insurance premium because he forgot the due date. Not a single one of them had followed up. No acknowledgement, just more requests. That night, I sat at my tiny kitchen table, still in my work clothes, eating dry cereal out of a coffee mug, and wondering if anyone would even notice if I just stopped helping. No. They'd notice. But not for the reasons you'd hope. They'd notice because the bills would go unpaid, the groceries would run low, Brandon wouldn't get his monthly allowance disguised as help getting back on his feet. They'd notice the loss of convenience, of stability, but they wouldn't miss me. That was the moment the first wall went up inside me. I didn't yell, I didn't confront anyone. I just started changing. Quietly, secretly. I opened a new savings account under a different bank, one they didn't know about. Every month, I started siphoning off a small amount. Nothing that would raise suspicion. Just enough to start building a safety net. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't saving for them. I was saving for me. I also started writing things down. Every transaction, every Venmo, every Zelle transfer. I bought a small leather journal from a street vendor downtown and used it as my personal ledger. Each page documented a different month. Each entry logged not only the amount, but the reason they gave, and how quickly I sent it. There were patterns. Clear, glaring patterns. Brandon always needed money the week after rent was due. Mom's emergencies usually popped up before holidays or family birthdays. Dad's prescriptions changed too often to be believable. It was like they were rotating excuses, and I had been buying every single one. I started paying more attention to the way they asked, too. The guilt layering was subtle, an art form. I hate to bother you, or I wouldn't ask if we weren't desperate, or I know you're doing great, sweetie, so this probably isn't a big deal. I was being handled, coaxed, groomed to say yes over and over again. The worst part? I let it happen for years because I wanted to be loved, because I thought love was earned through sacrifice, because I was the daughter who never said no, but all they did was take. It wasn't just money they drained, it was time, energy, and the small joys I barely had space for. When I canceled my first vacation in 5 years to cover a home repair they claimed was urgent, no one asked how I felt about it. They just said, "Good call. You wouldn't have enjoyed it anyway with all this going on." They made it sound like I was lucky to be needed. I started withdrawing in other ways too. Shorter calls, less frequent check-ins. I didn't volunteer updates about my life anymore. If they didn't ask, I didn't offer. And they didn't ask. Not once did Mom call just to see how I was doing. Dad never asked about my job, even when I landed a massive client at work. Brandon didn't even bother pretending to care. He just texted when he wanted something. I began testing boundaries. I delayed responses, took 2 days to send money instead of 2 hours, skipped one emergency entirely to see what would happen. They managed just fine. Funny that. It's incredible what people can survive without when they don't have a choice. And yet, the moment I returned to help again, softened by guilt they'd mastered instilling, they slipped right back into the pattern, like nothing had changed. But I had. There was one night, about 2 months before I left for good, when I stood in my bedroom, staring at myself in the mirror. I looked tired, not just the surface level kind, but deep tissue exhaustion. The kind that crawls into your bones and makes a home there. I didn't recognize the woman looking back at me. That's when I whispered the words I hadn't let myself say aloud. This isn't love. It wasn't care. It wasn't connection. It was a transaction that only flowed one way. So I began preparing for the end. For freedom. I researched tenant laws, researched identity protections, started removing my name from anything joint. Utilities, shared subscriptions, auto-pay accounts. I filed a change of address with the post office under a P.O. box. I wasn't just leaving their house. I was exiting their system. And I did it quietly, because I didn't need them to know I was escaping. I just needed them to never find a way back in. I didn't expect a thank you, but I also didn't expect to be mocked. A week before I finally walked out, I stopped by the house for what I thought might be the last time. I didn't say that out loud, of course. I brought groceries like always. Bags of salmon, fresh greens, almond milk Mom liked, but never bought herself. The sky was already dark when I pulled into the driveway. Brandon's car, well, technically Dad's old sedan, was crooked in the middle of the lawn again, wheels halfway buried in the dirt like he hadn't moved it in days. Inside, the lights were on. The TV was blasting some game show rerun. Brandon was in his usual spot, lying on the couch, shirtless, one leg dangling off the edge, a controller in his hand. He didn't even look up when I walked in. "About time," he mumbled. "I thought you were coming yesterday." No hi, no how are you, just that casual entitlement that had become his trademark. I set the bags down on the kitchen counter. Mom appeared from the hallway, wiping her hands on a dish towel like she'd just finished scrubbing something important. Except the sink was filled with dishes I'd washed the last time I visited. She gave me a quick once-over, the kind that lingered on my blouse and my watch, then said, "You look tired." I didn't answer. I just started unloading the groceries. "You know," she added, pulling out the frozen meals I brought, "it wouldn't kill you to pick up more of that teriyaki chicken your brother likes." I stared at her for a second. "That's all I could afford this week," I replied flatly. She sighed, loudly. like my answer inconvenienced her. Then came the part that broke something in me. Dad stepped in from the garage, wiping oil-stained hands on a rag, and said in the most casual voice, "We were talking earlier. Your mom and I were thinking it's time you chipped in a little more. Now that you live on your own and all." I blinked. "More?" He nodded, eyes locked on the ceiling like this conversation was as routine as asking someone to pass the salt. "Brandon's been looking for work, but it's hard right now, and the mortgage is getting tighter. I mean, you're doing well, right?" Brandon snorted from the couch. "She's practically rich." I turned slowly. He finally looked up, controller resting on his chest. "You've got that analyst job," he said, grinning like this was a joke we were all in on. "No kids, no husband, no bills except rent." "You act like you're struggling, but come on, Rach. It's not that deep." "Not that deep?" My jaw tightened. I hadn't taken a real vacation in 3 years. I wore the same 2 pairs of work shoes until the soles peeled. I'd skipped meals to make transfers, skipped therapy, skipped sleep. And this man-child, who hadn't held a job longer than 3 months since high school, had the audacity to sit on his ass and smirk like I was just being dramatic. It was like standing in the center of a warped funhouse mirror, where every act of kindness was twisted into an obligation, and every boundary I drew was selfishness. "You know what else isn't that deep?" I said, my voice ice cold. "Watching you eat food I paid for while you trash-talk me with your mouth full." Brandon raised his eyebrows, like he couldn't believe I'd spoken back. Mom's lips thinned into that sharp, familiar line, the one she used when she didn't want to argue, she wanted control. "You're being disrespectful," she said quietly. I took a breath, held it, released it. "Respect goes both ways," I said. Silence. Thick, suffocating. Dad rubbed the back of his neck, muttered something about everyone being on edge, and walked back into the garage, like it was safer there. Like hiding in oil fumes was easier than facing the truth of what this family had become. I turned to grab my purse, but Mom stepped closer, blocking me. "If it's such a burden," she said, voice trembling, "then maybe you shouldn't come at all." There it was, the line she always dangled like a trap. For years, I'd twisted myself into knots to prove I was the reliable one, the loyal one, the daughter who stayed. I paid, I visited, I helped. I held my tongue. And still, it was never enough. So I met her eyes, and for once, I didn't flinch. "Maybe I won't," I said softly. Brandon scoffed behind me. "Drama queen." I left the bags where they were, didn't unpack them, didn't write a check like usual or tape the receipt to the fridge. I just walked out. No one followed. No one called after me. The front door clicked shut, and the world outside was quiet. The kind of quiet that didn't beg or demand or drain. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and felt something inside me begin to calcify. A part of me, still soft, still hoping to be seen, shriveled and hardened into something sharper. Not hate, not quite, but certainty. They had always assumed I'd bend. They never imagined I'd break away. I always thought betrayal would come with screaming, some violent, dramatic moment that let you know everything had changed. But mine came on a rainy Thursday night, wrapped in silence and an email subject line that made my stomach knot. "Mortgage account flagged for inactivity." I reread it 5 times, convinced it had to be a mistake. My hands shook as I typed in the credentials I hadn't used in months. The same ones I used to make monthly transfers from my account to the house I grew up in. Access granted. The last payment recorded? Nearly 9 months ago. I sat motionless at my desk, raindrops tapping against the window behind me. I remembered, with almost painful clarity, sending 3 separate deposits after that date, over $3,000 total, to Mom's account. Labeled clearly in the memo, for the mortgage. Not one of those payments made it to the loan. My ears started ringing. A low buzz, like a warning siren muffled by disbelief. I picked up my phone and scrolled to those transfers. I still had the receipts, still had the texts where Mom insisted the bank was on their case, and she needed my help just for this month. Every message felt like a nail hammered into the coffin of my patience. They lied. Deliberately, repeatedly. I wasn't naive. I knew they'd leaned on me too much, knew they'd taken more than they gave, but I never imagined they'd pocket the money and let the house fall into foreclosure. What the hell had they done with it? That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't even turn off the light. I sat in the living room, on the same couch I'd bought off Craigslist, and stared at the wall like it could give me answers. By morning, I had one goal: get the truth. I started with the bank. I called from my work phone, calm and professional, pretending I was assisting with a family financial reorganization. It took 20 minutes, 3 security questions, and a polite-sounding supervisor before I got what I needed. The last full mortgage payment had cleared 8 months prior. The account was flagged, not just late, but marked at risk. It got worse. They'd applied for a forbearance using my email address. I never saw it because they must have set up a separate inbox under my name. They impersonated me. The silence I'd kept out of loyalty now turned into fuel. I collected everything: screenshots, bank statements, phone logs. I copied emails to a USB, created backups in cloud storage, then printed hard copies and locked them in a file drawer in my office. If they were going to treat me like a bank, I'd become an auditor. Then I made my final move. I called an attorney. Not to sue. Not yet. I wanted documentation. Something official that removed my name from anything they'd tied me to without consent. Identity misuse, fraud under state law, financial coercion. He walked me through every step. I filed a statement with the bank, disavowing all activity past a specific date. They launched a fraud review. My attorney drafted a cease and desist, warning that further attempts to use my information would trigger legal consequences. The next step was harder. I blocked them. Every number, every email, every social. I even had my HR department add a security flag to my file, just in case someone tried to pose as me for income verification. But the part that felt most like revenge wasn't legal. It was emotional. I let go. Of the guilt. Of the obligation. Of the endless voice in my head whispering, "But they're your family." Because family doesn't steal your name and let your childhood home collapse, while you're left wondering where the hell your savings went. Still, they didn't stay quiet for long. A week later, the voicemail started. Not to my main number. I'd changed that. But to my work line. I'd forgotten to update the directory listing. Brandon left the first one. "So you're just gonna ghost us while everything falls apart? Real classy. Thought you were better than this." I didn't respond. Next came Mom. "Rachel, I don't know what you've been told, but things are really bad. We need to talk. Please don't make decisions you'll regret." Deshad's was the last, and somehow the worst. "You've made your point, but if this house goes, it's on you." On me? I stared at the ceiling, trying not to scream. They still believed I owed them salvation. They were sinking, and instead of learning to swim, they were reaching up, hoping I'd throw myself into the water again. But not this time. This time, I was done being the net. I wasn't trying to ruin them. I wasn't setting fires. I was just stepping back and letting the flames they started reach their natural end. That's what happens when you burn bridges too many times. Eventually, the other side walks away. And they don't look back. The final voicemail came on a Sunday morning. I was watering the plants on my tiny third-floor balcony, the air still holding that early spring bite. Birds chirped faintly from a nearby oak tree. I hadn't checked messages in days, not since the last wave of half-truths and accusations, but something nudged me, a quiet itch beneath the skin. I pressed play. "Rachel, this is your father! I hope you're happy. Your mother hasn't stopped crying. Your brother's been sleeping in the car since we got the letter. The bank's coming for the house next week. That's it, I guess. You did what you wanted." No apology, just blame, guilt, and a final attempt to twist the knife. I stared at the railing, hand tightening around the watering can. For years, that tone had worked like a leash around my throat. But now, it felt like listening to someone I used to know in a past life, a life I had no intention of stepping back into. That afternoon, I took a walk through Piedmont Park. It had become part of my routine, my replacement for the Sunday family dinners I used to host and pay for. I passed a street musician strumming under a tree, the smell of hot dogs and kettle corn thick in the air. Kids chased pigeons across the lawn. Life. Normal, unscripted life. It surrounded me. And I felt okay. Maybe not whole. Not yet. But no longer hollow either. I spent years pouring every part of myself into people who measured affection by how much they could extract. Now I was learning what it meant to exist for my own sake. To wake up and not brace for a crisis. To laugh without checking my phone. To take a deep breath without that lingering ache in my chest. Healing wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was a quiet shift. A week after that voicemail, I got a certified letter from the bank. The foreclosure had been finalized. The house, my childhood home, was no longer theirs. I expected to feel gutted, but I didn't. I felt free. That place wasn't a sanctuary. It was a vault where they stored their excuses and buried my boundaries. And now, someone else would paint over those walls. Someone new would open windows I'd once looked out of with a heart full of pressure. The cycle ended, not with fire, but with silence. It took time, but I finally stopped checking for texts that never came. I stopped wondering if they'd change. If they'd suddenly wake up one day and see me not as a resource, but as a daughter. A person, a soul with limits. Spoiler, they didn't. And that's okay. Not everyone gets closure tied up in a neat little bow. Sometimes, all you get is the peace that comes from not answering the door when chaos knocks. I rebuilt. Slowly, I found a new apartment, this one with a real view and floors that didn't creak. I treated myself to a proper vacation, just a weekend in Asheville, but enough to remember what quiet sounded like. I joined a book club, took salsa lessons, bought groceries without doing math in my head. My life, once built around putting out other people's fires, finally felt like my own. And yet, on some nights, when everything is still, a flicker of doubt crawls in. Was I too harsh? Did I abandon them? Did I fail the very people who raised me? But then I remember, love isn't a ledger, and loyalty should never require self-erasure. The hardest part wasn't cutting ties. It was forgiving myself for not doing it sooner. One evening, I found an old photo tucked inside a worn-out folder. I was maybe 10, braces and all, grinning with cake frosting on my cheek. Brandon had his arm slung over my shoulder, mid-laugh. We looked like a family. We looked happy. But pictures lie. Memories are tricky like that. They wear rose-tinted disguises, softening the sharp edges of reality. Still, I didn't throw it away. I slipped it back into the folder and put it in a drawer. Not out of sentiment, but because I didn't want to rewrite the past. I just didn't want to live there anymore. There's a strange kind of power in walking away with nothing but your name and your spine intact. I thought I'd be haunted. I thought I'd carry guilt like a scar. But instead I carried space, room to grow, room to rest, room to finally breathe. And now I want to ask you, whoever you are, wherever you are reading this, have you ever had to choose between peace and obligation? Between protecting your own heart and saving someone else's comfort? If you've ever been called selfish for drawing a line, if you've ever been punished for saying no, if you've ever been told love means never leaving, even when staying is killing you, then I hope this story reminds you that choosing yourself isn't cruelty. It's courage. So tell me, if you were in my place, would you have done the same? Would you have walked away? Or would you still be standing in that house, holding up the walls as they crumbled around you? Because I did walk away, and I haven't looked back since.